For more, let's bring in Len Yaffe, Managing Director at Kesef Capital Management. Len, great to have you with us. How does this change the landscape? I mean, there's a lot we do not know, but we know things are going to be very different.
Yeah, what RFK talked about early on, I think, is getting rid of some of the indirect costs spending by NIH. I think he was looking at $4 billion of the $9 billion of indirect costs of their $35 billion budget. He did talk about looking into the increased incidence, as did President Trump, of autism. And also, and this is, to me, very interesting, looking at the increase in incidence in chronic conditions. And it's a topic I've spent a lot of time learning about. If you look at chronic conditions, 60% of Americans today have at least one, 40% have two. They're responsible for a disproportionate expenditure of healthcare dollars. 7 of the 15 top chronic conditions are directly related to obesity. And if you look at the rise in obesity over the last 60 years, it's gone from 10% of the population up to about 44%. Interestingly, 2023 was the first year where there was a flattening or a slight decline in the U.S. adult obesity rate. And it probably coincides with the approval of semaglutide in June of 2021. So although diet and exercise, which is harder, especially for older people, can help lose weight over time, I personally very strongly believe that the GLP-1s are the most transformative drug class that I've seen in my career, and that they will help prevent many of the chronic diseases, reduce morbidity, mortality, and cost over the next 5 years.
So if you piece things together, given he wants to stamp out or stem chronic diseases, obesity is the source. We've got GLP-1s, we've got compounded GLP-1s, which is making this drug class more accessible to Americans writ large. And then you have the head of the FDA, Dr. McCary, who was on the board of a telehealth company. What's sort of the conclusion here? Is there a conclusion to be made?
Well, whether they're the right ones or not that I have, my conclusion is I look at the FDA rules there called 503 A and B that relate to compounding, and they very clearly state that when a drug is no longer in short supply, compounding is not allowed. The compounded drugs are not as FDA regulated as are the branded drugs, and they're not FDA approved. Tirzepatide, Lilly's drug, is off the shortage list. Semaglutide is still on the list, and there's an FDA decision due out, I think, March 19th as it relates to tirzepatide. So my own personal expectation, if history is any guide, would be that compounding should not be allowed as the drugs are no longer in shortage, and that the branded companies, Lilly and Novo in this case, should be allowed to sell the drug without compounded competition. And again, as I've stated, I think we're, in the first inning as we approach spring training of the use of GLP-1s, and it's going to do far better than Wall Street thinks. My own expectations are 50% higher than Wall Street's expectations in 2030. So I think it's a phenomenal class. I am not in favor of the compounding solution, and I think these two companies will be the leaders.
It's Karen. Thanks for being on. So if you're as excited about GLP-1s as I've probably heard anyone, do you think there's a scenario where the government covers the cost? It's very, very widely used and actually can help the cost come down of our overall healthcare expenditures.
Yeah, and it hasn't surprised me in the last year that Lilly had to lower their expectations for GLP-1s. What drives the use of GLP-1s isn't obesity per se. It's the reduction in chronic conditions that, again, are associated with tremendous morbidity, mortality, and cost. So as the data over the next 2 years, we've had data in cardiovascular outcomes, sleep apnea. We'll get data from Novo later this year in an Alzheimer's trial. There'll be data in knee osteoarthritis, kidney disease, liver disease. As this data comes out and the insurers realize there's tremendous cost savings to be had, not just cost because of obesity, they will be forced to cover the drugs for reimbursement. The government likely will, and we'll see a much healthier America. And in the 2030s, healthcare costs will lower in growth.